Hey guys, tonight we travel to the sun-drenched hills of California's wine country, a place where life is supposed to be slower, sweeter, and infinitely more beautiful. But beneath the dappled sunlight filtering through the grapevines, we find a story that's anything but. It's a tale of a man who builds an empire from the soil up, only to vanish into thin air, leaving behind a pristine crime scene and a single, silent witness who can't speak. This one gets strange, so you probably shouldn't be listening to this alone. The silence in your own house might start to feel heavy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in Sonoma County carries a specific weight in early October. It's a sweet, almost boozy perfume of grapes being harvested, mixed with the cool, earthy scent of damp soil. This is Richard "Rick" Sterling's kingdom. His estate, a sprawling masterpiece of glass and redwood, sits perched on a hill, a silent monarch surveying its dominion of perfectly manicured vineyards. Rick is 58, a man carved from ambition. He didn't inherit this life, he wrestled it from the earth, turning a forgotten patch of land into the award-winning Sterling Vineyards. He's a creature of habit, a man whose daily routine is as predictable as the sunrise over the Mayacamas Mountains. On Tuesday morning, that routine fractures. Rick rises at 6 a.m., as always. He pulls on his worn boots, shares a quiet cup of coffee with his wife of 30 years, Eleanor, and then takes his German Shepherd, Max, for their customary walk. The dog is his shadow, a loyal and imposing presence that follows him through the rows of Cabernet Sauvignon. Around 7:30 a.m., he kisses Eleanor goodbye, tells her he'll be back for lunch, and climbs into his gleaming black Land Rover. He's heading to the winery's main office, a 10-minute drive down the winding private road. He never arrives. When he doesn't return by 1 p.m., Eleanor feels the first prickle of unease. Rick is never late for lunch. She calls his cell. It rings, and then goes to voicemail. She calls his office. His assistant, flustered, says she's been waiting for him all morning to sign off on a major distribution deal. The unease blossoms into a cold knot of dread. Eleanor calls the sheriff. By late afternoon, deputies find the Land Rover. It's parked on a gravel service road that borders the vast estate, a path used mostly by vineyard workers. The scene is eerily calm. The driver's side door is slightly ajar, as if he just stepped out for a moment. The keys, attached to a heavy silver fob, are still in the ignition. On the passenger seat, his $1,000 leather briefcase sits untouched next to his smartphone and wallet, which is full of cash and credit cards. There are no skid marks, no broken glass, no drops of blood. The only thing out of place is the man himself. He's gone. Back at the house, Max paces the expansive front porch, whining, his eyes fixed on the driveway. He refuses to eat, refuses to be comforted. He is waiting for a master who isn't coming home. The first officers on the scene are patrol deputies, but within hours, the Sonoma County Sheriff's detectives take over. This isn't a typical missing person case. This is different. Many people believe police have to wait 24 or 48 hours to start a search for a missing adult, but that's a dangerous myth. When the disappearance is this uncharacteristic and the circumstances are this suspicious, it's treated as a potential abduction or homicide from the very first call. The investigation into the vanishing of Rick Sterling begins not with a search, but with the quiet, methodical process of a no-body homicide case. The detectives, led by a seasoned investigator named Isabella Rossi, start with the car. The crime scene unit dusts for prints, vacuums for fibers, and photographs every inch of the vehicle. The scene is almost surgically clean. It's the absence of evidence that screams the loudest. A robbery would be messy. A carjacking would leave signs of a struggle. This feels planned. This feels personal. Then, a technician finds something. Tucked under the driver's seat, almost invisible against the black floor mat, is a single cigar. It's a Monte Cristo No. 2, unsmoked, its wrapper perfect. Here's the first twist. Rick Sterling, a man who once loved fine cigars, had quit cold turkey 5 years prior after a minor heart attack. His wife is adamant he never touched them again. And more than that, his preferred brand was always Cohiba. The Monte Cristo wasn't his. It suggests he wasn't alone. It suggests he may have stopped his car willingly to meet someone he knew. As the sun sets, casting long, distorted shadows across the vineyard, the scope of the investigation widens. Who would Rick Sterling meet on a secluded surface road? Who would bring him a cigar he wouldn't smoke? The case becomes a puzzle built from negative space. Investigators are forced to rely entirely on circumstantial evidence, the little pieces of a person's life that, when assembled, might point toward the truth. This is a point of constant, unresolved debate in the legal world. Can a conviction ever be truly just when it's built on a mountain of maybes without a confession, a weapon, or the victim's body? Experts still argue over the tipping point where the weight of circumstance becomes as solid as direct proof. For Detective Rossi, that journey begins now, with a missing millionaire, a devoted dog that won't stop watching the road, and a single, silent cigar that doesn't belong. Your attention shifts from the sterile quiet of the Land Rover to the living, breathing heart of the case, the people in Rick Sterling's life. Detective Rossi knows that men like Rick, powerful, wealthy, and uncompromising, don't just collect assets, they collect enemies. The investigation pivots from the scene of the disappearance to the opulent house on the hill, where the circle of potential suspects begins to draw tight. Every word, every glance, every hesitation is now a piece of the puzzle. First, there's Eleanor. She sits in a cream-colored armchair in her cavernous living room, a space so perfectly decorated it feels more like a magazine spread than a home. She's poised, her grief contained, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Max, the German Shepherd, lies at her feet, a furry bulwark against the intrusion of the police. He occasionally lifts his head to give a low rumble when a new detective enters the room, but he stays by her side. Eleanor answers Rossi's questions with a quiet, almost chilling precision. She recounts the morning's routine without a single tear. This unnerving composure is the first thing that snags Rossi's professional intuition. Some people freeze in the face of trauma, but this feels different. It feels rehearsed. Rossi gently probes into their financial situation. Eleanor doesn't flinch. Rick was the business, she says, her voice as smooth as the Chardonnay from their vineyard. I handled the home. Rossi, having done her homework, knows this is an understatement. She also knows about their prenuptial agreement. It's an ironclad document Rick's lawyers drew up 30 years ago. In the event of a divorce, Eleanor gets a respectable but relatively small settlement. However, in the event of his death, she inherits everything: the estate, the winery, the 9-figure fortune. It's a classic, almost cliché motive. The irony is thick enough to bottle. In trying to protect his fortune from a potential divorce, Rick may have signed his own death warrant. When Rossi asks about the Monte Cristo cigar, Eleanor's expression is one of genuine surprise. I haven't seen Rick with a cigar in years. He hated the smell after he quit. She offers no theories, no suggestions. She is a placid lake, and Rossi suspects a monster lurks in her depths. Next is the stepson, Julian Croft. He's 28, the product of Eleanor's brief first marriage. Rossi finds him in a converted barn on the far side of the estate that serves as his art studio. The air inside is sharp with the smell of ozone and hot metal. Julian is a sculptor, and his medium is salvaged junk. Twisted rebar, rusted car parts, and mangled gears form terrifying skeletal figures that loom in the dusty light. He's the complete opposite of his stepfather, sullen, clad in grease-stained jeans, with a resentful fire in his eyes. His alibi is that he was here, in his studio, all morning, working on a new piece. He points to a half-finished sculpture, its welds still warm. It's a flimsy alibi, easily faked. The tension between Julian and Rick was legendary in the family. Rick, the self-made tycoon, saw his stepson as a lazy, ungrateful drain on his resources. Julian saw his stepfather as a tyrant who married his mother for her social standing and then tried to erase every part of her previous life, including him. The motive here isn't just greed, it's a deep, simmering resentment. 2 weeks ago, Rick had finally cut him off, threatening to evict him from the barn. When Rossi presents a photo of the cigar, Julian scoffs. Looks like something the old man would smoke to impress some schmuck. I wouldn't know. He's defensive, angry, and makes no effort to hide his missing stepfather. It's an odd detail, but Rossi notices several small, fresh burn marks on the cuffs of his work shirt, consistent with welding sparks. To a detective's eye, they could also be explained by something far more sinister. The third point on the triangle is Marcus Thorne, Rick's business partner and the CFO of Sterling Vineyards. Rossi interviews him at the winery office, a sleek, corporate space that smells of money and ambition. Marcus is everything Julian isn't: polished, articulate, and overflowing with cooperative concern. He speaks of Rick in glowing terms, calling him a mentor and a visionary. He has an airtight alibi. He was at a viticulture conference in Napa, a 2-hour drive away. He provides credit card receipts from a Napa coffee shop at 8:15 a.m., a signed attendance sheet from a 9 a.m. panel, and even names 2 other vintners he had breakfast with. It's perfect, almost too perfect. Rossi floats the idea of financial trouble at the winery. Marcus's smile is unwavering. "We're having a banner year," he says smoothly. "The new distribution deal Rick was coming to sign, it's our biggest yet." But a quiet check with the winery's accounting firm tells a different story. The firm had flagged several large, unusual wire transfers from the company's accounts to an offshore entity over the last 6 months. They were scheduled to meet with Rick about it next week. The motive sharpens into focus: greed. If Rick had discovered Marcus was embezzling, the conference in Napa would be the perfect cover for arranging a permanent solution to his problem. This is where a real-world legal dilemma often surfaces for investigators. If Rossi gets a warrant for Marcus's financial records based on a hunch, and that hunch is wrong, she risks a lawsuit. If she leans too hard on Julian without more evidence, she could be accused of harassment. The evidence is all circumstantial, a web of motives without a solid thread connecting anyone to the crime. This leads to the unresolved debate among legal scholars and police about the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine. If an investigator, frustrated by the lack of progress, were to obtain a key piece of evidence through a questionable or illegal search, anything discovered as a result of that evidence would likely be thrown out of court. Rossi knows she has to build this case by the book. 3 suspects, 3 solid motives: Eleanor's inheritance, Julian's resentment, and Marcus's potential fraud. One of them is a liar, and Rossi has a feeling the calmest one, the one with the 9-figure payday waiting, might be the most dangerous of all. The investigation stalls. A week bleeds into 2, and Rick Sterling remains a ghost. The media circus has descended on Sonoma, their news vans lining the picturesque country roads like vultures. The search parties have combed every inch of the sprawling estate and the surrounding wilderness, finding nothing. The case file on Detective Rossi's desk grows thicker with lab reports that all say the same thing: no prints, no DNA, no answers. The Monte Cristo cigar yields no saliva, no fingerprints, a dead end. The pressure from the sheriff's office is mounting. They need a break, a crack in the pristine facade of one of their suspects. Rossi decides it's time to apply a different kind of pressure. She turns to a tool that is both a staple of crime drama and one of the most controversial instruments in real-world law enforcement: the polygraph, the lie detector test. The science behind the polygraph is a subject of fierce debate. It doesn't detect lies. It measures physiological responses to stress, changes in heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and skin conductivity. The theory is that the act of lying causes stress, but so does being accused of a crime you didn't commit. So does grief. The results of a polygraph are not admissible as evidence in most US courts. Why? Because the machine can be beaten. Sociopaths feel no stress when they lie, and seasoned liars can learn countermeasures. Conversely, an honest, nervous person can easily fail. However, law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, still use it regularly as an investigative tool, a way to gauge a suspect's reactions and steer the direction of questioning. It's a psychological crowbar used to pry open a case. Rossi decides to start with the person at the center of the web, Eleanor Sterling. She approaches her with a carefully crafted speech, framing the polygraph not as an accusation, but as a way for Eleanor to formally clear her name and help them focus their resources elsewhere. "It will allow us to eliminate you from our inquiries," Rossi says, the words chosen with surgical precision. To Rossi's surprise, Eleanor agrees immediately, almost eagerly. Her calm composure remains unshaken. "Of course, detective. Anything I can do to help find my husband." But then she makes a request. A very, very odd request. "I'd like to bring Max with me," she says, stroking the German Shepherd's head. "He's been my rock through all of this. I don't go anywhere without him. His presence, it calms my nerves." The lance lands like a stone in the quiet room. Rossi exchanges a glance with her partner. Bringing a large animal into a controlled polygraph examination room is unheard of. The room is designed to be a sterile environment, free from distractions that could skew the results. A dog, especially one as large and protective as Max, is the ultimate distraction. Rossi's first instinct is to refuse. It's a violation of all standard procedure. But then, a flicker of something crosses her mind. An idea, unorthodox and professionally risky. Eleanor claims the dog calms her. But what if the opposite is true? What if the dog, who was devoted to Rick, becomes agitated by something in the room? An animal's instinct is a powerful, unquantifiable variable. Rossi finds herself intrigued by this unexpected wrinkle. It's a gamble, but at this point, she needs one. All right, Mrs. Sterling, Rossi concedes, against her better judgment. Max can come. The day of the polygraph arrives. The room is small, windowless, and painted a soul-crushing shade of beige. It contains a specialized chair, a desk for the examiner, and monitoring equipment. The examiner is a man named Arthur Finch, a seasoned practitioner with 2 decades of experience, contracted by the county. He's a fussy, precise man with a neatly trimmed mustache and an air of detached professionalism. When Eleanor walks in with Max on a leash, Finch's composure cracks. His eyebrows shoot up. "Detective, what is this? This is highly irregular." Rossi explains the situation, and Finch, after a moment of sputtering protest, reluctantly agrees. Max, sensing the tension, lets out a low growl. Eleanor kneels, murmuring to him in a soft voice, and he settles onto a small rug they've placed in the corner of the room. He lies with his head on his paws, his intelligent brown eyes tracking every movement. The examination begins. Finch starts with baseline questions, the controls. Is your name Eleanor Sterling? Do you live in Sonoma County? Her physiological responses are recorded, establishing a pattern for her truthful answers. The needles on the machine barely quiver. Eleanor is as calm as a frozen pond. Then, Finch moves to the relevant questions. Do you know the current whereabouts of your husband, Richard Sterling? Were you involved in any way in his disappearance? Eleanor answers each question with a firm, clear no. Her heart rate remains steady. Her breathing is even. The machine indicates she is telling the truth. Rossi watches from the observation room, a knot of frustration tightening in her stomach. Eleanor is either innocent or one of the most remarkable liars she has ever encountered. But then, something strange happens. It's the first twist in this bizarre scene. As Finch asks, "Did you arrange for someone to harm your husband?" Max lifts his head. His ears go flat against his skull, and a low, guttural growl rumbles from his chest. Eleanor glances at him, her mask of serenity momentarily slipping. She murmurs, "It's okay, boy," but the dog's focus isn't on her. It's on Arthur Finch. "Who brought the Monte Cristo cigar to your husband's car?" Again, Eleanor says, "No." And again, the machine shows no deception. But this time, Max's reaction is more dramatic. He stands up, the fur along his spine bristling. His growl intensifies, and he takes a step forward, his lips curling back to reveal a flash of white teeth. His stare is locked on Finch. The examiner, now visibly unnerved, tries to ignore the dog and asks his final crucial question. "Did you lie to me at any point during this examination?" Eleanor replies with a confident no. The polygraph needles barely twitch. But Max explodes. He lunges forward, barking furiously, straining against the leash in Eleanor's hand. He isn't barking at Eleanor, he's lunging at the polygraph examiner. The room erupts into chaos. Finch leaps back from his desk, knocking over his chair. Eleanor struggles to control the snarling 90-pound dog. Rossi bursts in from the observation room. The test is over. Eleanor, for all intents and purposes, has passed. But Max, Rick Sterling's loyal companion, has failed the examiner. A dog can't read a polygraph, but it can read people. And Max has decided that the most dangerous person in this sterile, beige room is the man asking the questions. The polygraph room is a wreck of psychological shrapnel. Arthur Finch is pale and shaken, his professional demeanor shattered. Eleanor Sterling is flushed, wrestling with a dog that is still vibrating with aggression. Detective Rossi stands in the doorway, her mind racing, trying to process the scene. The results of the polygraph are, on paper, clear. Eleanor shows no signs of deception. But the visceral, undeniable reaction of the dog has turned the entire procedure on its head. It's a development so bizarre, it feels like a scene from a movie, not a real criminal investigation. Rossi calls for a break. She has a uniformed officer escort a flustered Eleanor and a still growling Max to a separate waiting area. Then she closes the door to the polygraph room, leaving her alone with the disheveled examiner. The air is thick with the scent of ozone from the equipment and something else. Finch's fear. Rossi watches him as he straightens his tie and fumbles to right his fallen chair. His hands are trembling. I've never, in 20 years, had anything like that happen, Finch stammers, avoiding her gaze. That animal should never have been allowed in here. It's compromised the entire test. Maybe, Rossi says, her voice low and even. Or maybe it gave us the only honest reading in the room. Finch scoffs, a weak, defensive sound. What are you suggesting, detective? That the dog is some kind of canine lie detector? That's absurd. The machine is the only thing that matters, and the machine says the woman is truthful. But Rossi is no longer looking at the machine. She's looking at him. The dog wasn't reacting to her answers, Arthur. He was reacting to you. Every time you asked a key question, he targeted you. Why? This is a critical pivot. Rossi is following a thread of pure instinct, a hunch born from an animal's inexplicable behavior. In many jurisdictions, this type of investigative leap based on something so unscientific would be professionally ridiculed. It's a moment that highlights the ongoing debate about the role of intuition versus hard evidence in police work. Can a gut feeling, even one sparked by a dog's bark, be a legitimate reason to shift the focus of a multi-million-dollar homicide investigation? For Rossi, the answer is a resounding yes. The dog is unstable, obviously, Finch says, gathering his papers with jerky movements. It's probably sensing Mrs. Sterling's stress, her grief, and projecting it. Her grief? Rossi's tone is laced with sarcasm. The woman was as cool as a cucumber. You, on the other hand, look like you just saw a ghost. She walks closer, invading his personal space. Let's talk about the questions. When you asked about arranging harm to her husband, Max got agitated. When you asked about the cigar, he got aggressive. It was your words, your voice. It's almost as if he recognized something. Finch stiffens. That's preposterous. This is where Rossi employs a classic interrogation technique, the subtle introduction of a piece of information to gauge a reaction. She remembers the Monte Cristo cigar found in the car. It was a specific detail, not yet released to the public. Only the detectives, the lab techs, and the inner circle of suspects knew about it. She decides to see if Finch knows something he shouldn't. "You know what's odd, Arthur?" she says casually, leaning against a desk. "We found a very specific brand of cigar in Rick Sterling's car. A Monte Cristo number 2. Ever smoke those? It's a shot in the dark, but it hits its mark." A flicker of something crosses Finch's face, a micro-expression of panic, there and gone in a fraction of a second. But Rossi sees it. No, I don't smoke cigars," he says, but his voice is a half-octave higher than before. He's lying. Rossi's internal alarm bells are screaming. Why would a polygraph examiner, a man whose entire career is based on detecting lies, lie about something so trivial as smoking a cigar? The irony is staggering. The man paid to find the liar in the room might be the biggest liar of them all. Rossi lets the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. She thanks Finch for his time, her voice now cold and formal. She tells him his services are no longer required for the day. As he practically flees the room, Rossi knows the investigation has just taken a 90-degree turn. The focus is no longer on the grieving widow, the resentful stepson, or the smooth-talking business partner. It's on the lie detector man himself. Back in her office, Rossi pulls up Arthur Finch's professional file. He's a freelance examiner, not a direct employee of the sheriff's department, which means he works for various clients, both public and private. She starts a deep dive into his background, a search for any connection, no matter how tenuous, to the Sterling case. It's tedious, painstaking work. She looks at his financial records, his phone logs, his social media presence. At first, there's nothing. He appears to be exactly what he claims to be, a boring, meticulous man who lives a quiet, solitary life. But then she finds it. An odd, seemingly insignificant detail buried in his credit card statements. For the past 6 months, Finch has had a recurring monthly charge from a high-end cigar shop in Napa. The charge is always for the same amount. Rossi makes a call. The shop owner is happy to cooperate. He confirms that Arthur Finch has a standing monthly order. He buys 1 box every month of Monte Cristo number 2. The connection clicks into place like a key in a lock. The cigar wasn't brought for Rick. It wasn't a sign of a friendly meeting. It was dropped. It was a mistake. And the person who dropped it, the person who was almost certainly at the scene of Rick Sterling's disappearance, was the one man who should have been impartial. The one man who was supposed to help them find the truth. The dog didn't sense a lie. It sensed a person. It smelled the familiar scent of those cigars on the man asking the questions, linking him in its canine mind to the last moments of his master's life. The chaos in the polygraph room wasn't a random act of an unstable animal. It was a verdict. It was an accusation. The revelation about Arthur Finch and his penchant for Monte Cristo No. 2 cigars transforms him from a peripheral figure into a central person of interest. Detective Rossi feels that electric jolt that comes when a case breaks open, the moment when chaos begins to crystallize into a coherent theory. The investigation now races down a new, unexpected path. It's no longer about who wanted Rick Sterling gone, but about how the man hired to find the truth became entangled in the crime itself. Rossi immediately pulls a warrant for Finch's detailed phone records and financial statements. While she waits for the legal paperwork to process, she digs into his professional history, specifically his freelance work. This brings up a fascinating and often debated aspect of the American justice system: the role of private contractors in law enforcement. Experts argue that while outsourcing services like polygraph testing can be cost-effective, it also introduces a layer of potential conflicts of interest that are harder to vet than with sworn officers. Finch, as a contractor, worked for law firms, corporations, and wealthy individuals, not just the county. His loyalties could be for sale. The first lead comes from his list of corporate clients. Rossi cross-references the list with every business associate of Rick Sterling she can find. It's a fishing expedition, but a necessary one. She gets a hit. 3 months ago, Arthur Finch was hired by a Napa-based financial consultancy firm. The firm's client list is confidential, but Rossi uses a bit of departmental leverage and gets a name. The firm was hired by none other than Marcus Thorne, Rick Sterling's business partner, the man with the airtight alibi. The connection is tenuous but tantalizing. Why would Marcus, the CFO of Sterling Vineyards, hire a financial consultancy that then hired Arthur Finch? The pieces don't quite fit. Rossi suspects it was a move to create distance, a layer of plausible deniability. Marcus didn't hire Finch directly, a firm he employed did. It's a classic corporate shell game. The warrant for Finch's phone records comes through. His call logs for the past few months are a goldmine. There are dozens of calls between him and a burner phone. The calls are short, often lasting less than a minute, typical of people trying to coordinate without having a real conversation. But the timing is what makes Rossi's blood run cold. There's a flurry of calls between Finch and the burner phone in the days leading up to Rick's disappearance, and one call at 7:45 a.m. on the morning he vanished, minutes after he left his house. The next step is to trace the burner phone. This is notoriously difficult, but not impossible. Using cell tower triangulation data, Rossi's tech team maps the phone's location for the past few weeks. It pings towers all over Sonoma and Napa counties, but it frequently activates near 2 key locations: Arthur Finch's quiet suburban home and the corporate office of Sterling Vineyards. The phone belongs to Marcus Thorne. The perfect alibi is beginning to look like a carefully constructed lie. Rossi now has a working theory. Marcus Thorne was embezzling money. Rick Sterling was getting close to discovering the fraud. Marcus needed him gone. But he couldn't do it himself. He needed an alibi. So he enlisted the help of Arthur Finch. But what was Finch's motive? A review of his financials provides the answer. The man who projected an air of quiet professionalism was drowning in debt. He had a gambling problem with significant losses from online poker sites and a second mortgage on his home. He was desperate. Marcus likely offered him a sum of money he couldn't refuse to help create a smokescreen. This brings Rossi to an interesting and slightly bizarre detail in Finch's file: a formal complaint filed against him 2 years prior. A wealthy client in a messy divorce case had accused Finch of attempting to manipulate a polygraph result in exchange for a bribe. The case was dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the accusation itself was a huge red flag. It showed a pattern of professional misconduct and a willingness to sell his credibility. It was a formal record of his price. The irony is almost poetic. Marcus Thorne, a man obsessed with numbers and risk management, chose an accomplice with a documented history of being a professional risk. It was a fatal miscalculation. He likely assumed no one would ever look at the polygraph examiner. He planned for the police to focus on Eleanor, the grieving widow with the 9-figure motive, or Julian, the resentful stepson. He hired Finch to help steer the investigation in that direction. He needed Eleanor to take a polygraph and pass, cementing her as a non-suspect in the eyes of the police and allowing the trail to go cold. The plan was clever, but it had a flaw. A flaw with 4 legs and an incredible sense of smell. They never accounted for the dog. They never imagined that Eleanor would insist on bringing her canine companion into the sterile interrogation room. They never considered that the dog, loyal to his vanished master, would recognize the scent of his last visitor on the man asking the questions. The entire ruse was exposed by an animal's instinct. Max wasn't just a dog, he was the ghost in the machine, the unpredictable variable that unraveled a meticulously planned crime. The cigar, dropped by a nervous Finch at the scene of the abduction, was the physical link. The dog's reaction was the emotional one. Now Rossi has a clear path forward. She needs to break Finch. He's the weak link, the one drowning in debt and facing professional ruin. Marcus is cool and confident, protected by a wall of corporate lawyers. But Finch is scared. Rossi knows that if she can apply enough pressure, he will trade his loyalty to Marcus for a deal with the district attorney. The investigation is no longer about finding a killer. It's about making one of the conspirators confess. The focus shifts from the vineyard to the interrogation room, where the fate of the case will be decided not by a polygraph machine, but by the old-fashioned art of psychological warfare. With Arthur Finch identified as the weak link, Detective Rossi's strategy becomes one of relentless, focused pressure. She doesn't arrest him, not yet. An arrest would give him the right to an attorney and an opportunity to coordinate his story with Marcus Thorne. Instead, she opts for a knock and talk, an unannounced visit to his home. It's a move that exists in a legal gray area. While police can approach a home and ask to speak with someone, the line between a consensual conversation and a custodial interrogation can become blurry. This tactic is a subject of constant legal debate, as evidence obtained can be challenged if a court later decides the person didn't truly feel free to leave. Rossi and her partner arrive at Finch's modest suburban house just after dawn. The garden is perfectly manicured, a stark contrast to the financial chaos of his life. When Finch answers the door, still in his bathrobe, the color drains from his face. He sees Rossi and he knows this isn't a social call. He tries to refuse them entry, but Rossi's calm, authoritative presence is overwhelming. "We can talk here on your doorstep, Arthur, where all your neighbors can see, or we can come inside. Your choice." He relents, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Inside, the house is obsessively neat, but Rossi isn't interested in the decor. She sits him down at his own dining room table, the same way he sits his subjects down for a polygraph, and begins. She doesn't accuse him of anything directly. She lays out the evidence, piece by piece, like cards on a table. The phone calls to the burner, the cell tower data placing the burner phone at his house and at the winery, the complaint from his previous client, and finally, the box of Monte Cristo No. 2 cigars sitting on his desk in the den, visible from the doorway. "You're a man who understands leverage, Arthur," Rossi says, her voice quiet. "Right now, you're looking at a charge of accessory to murder, but Marcus Thorne, He's the one who stands to gain millions. He's the one who pulled the strings. The DA might be willing to see you as a pawn, not a king. But that offer is only on the table for the first person who talks. Finch begins to crumble. His meticulously constructed composure disintegrates into a series of stutters and denials. He knows the game is up. He was a small-time grifter who got in way over his head, and now he's staring into the abyss. The gambler in him has to make one last bet: cooperate and hope for a lighter sentence, or stay loyal to Marcus and go down for life. He chooses to save himself. His confession comes out in a torrent of self-pity and fear. He explains that Marcus Thorne had approached him months ago. Marcus knew Rick was about to uncover his embezzlement scheme. He needed a way to get rid of Rick and frame someone else. The plan was sophisticated. Marcus would use his alibi at the Napa conference, while Finch would handle the abduction. The cigar was a plant meant to be found in the car to suggest Rick had met with a third party, throwing the investigation off track. Finch, clumsy and nervous, had dropped his own cigar by mistake. It was a detail that seems almost comically inept, a professional conspirator undone by a simple Butterfingers moment. Finch then reveals the centerpiece of the plot, Marcus Thorne's perfect alibi. The credit card receipts from the Napa coffee shop, prepaid online. The conference attendance sheet? Finch had a contact, a security guard at the conference center, whom he had bribed to sign Marcus's name on the sheet after the fact. The two vintners he claimed to have breakfast with? They were real, but Marcus had only spoken to them for 2 minutes in the lobby the day before, creating the impression of a meeting that never happened. It was a house of cards, built to withstand the cursory glance, but not a deep investigation. The most chilling part of Finch's confession is what happened on the morning of the disappearance. Finch, driving a nondescript rental car, waited on the service road. He called Marcus's burner phone to confirm he was in position. Marcus, from his office at the winery, then called Rick Sterling, pretending to be a representative from a rival vineyard with a sensitive buyout offer. He told Rick it had to be discussed in absolute secrecy, face to face, before his 9 a.m. meeting. He directed Rick to the secluded service road. It was a ruse designed to play on Rick's own ambition and penchant for secrecy. Rick arrived expecting a clandestine business meeting. Instead, he found Arthur Finch. Finch, using a taser, incapacitated Rick before he could even react. He then bundled him into the back of the rental car and drove off, leaving Rick's Land Rover with the door ajar to make it look like he just stepped out. Finch's role was to abduct Rick and hold him at a remote, pre-arranged location. The initial plan wasn't necessarily to kill him, but to use him as leverage if the embezzlement came to light. However, Marcus panicked. He realized that a living Rick Sterling was a loose end that could never be tied up. With Finch's confession, the focus snaps back to Marcus Thorne. Rossi now has probable cause and then some. A team of deputies is dispatched to the Sterling Winery's office. They find Marcus in a board meeting, ironically, discussing the winery's projected profits now that the lucrative distribution deal was back on track. When Rossi walks into the room, his mask of cool professionalism finally shatters. The look on his face is not one of surprise, but of cold, calculating fury. He knows, in that instant, that Finch has betrayed him. He remains silent, invokes his right to an attorney, and is placed under arrest. The perfect alibi has crumbled to dust. The collaboration between the embezzling CFO and the corrupt polygraph examiner is laid bare. It was a partnership of desperation and greed, a cynical plot to commit the perfect crime. But they made two critical errors. The first was underestimating the power of a simple mistake, a dropped cigar that became the single thread Rossi could pull to unravel the entire conspiracy. The second and more profound error was underestimating the loyalty of a dog. They never planned for Max. They never imagined that the key witness to their crime would be a silent protector who would, in the end, point the finger of guilt, not with a word, but with a growl. The trap they set for Eleanor Sterling had sprung on them. The arrest of Marcus Thorne and the confession of Arthur Finch create a domino effect, toppling the last remaining secrets of the case. The final piece of the puzzle is the one that matters most: finding Rick Sterling. Finch, in a desperate bid for leniency, agrees to lead detectives to the location. The atmosphere is tense as Rossi and her team, following Finch's directions, drive deep into the rugged hills of the Alexander Valley, an area known for its dense forests and isolated cabins. The location is a dilapidated hunting cabin, nearly swallowed by overgrown manzanita bushes. It's the kind of place that exists off the grid, forgotten by time. Finch had rented it under a false name months in advance. As they approach, the air grows heavy with a grim finality. Inside, they find what they had feared. Rick Sterling's body is discovered in a small, locked cellar beneath the cabin floor. The cause of death is determined to be a lethal overdose of sedatives, administered by Finch on Marcus Thorne's orders 2 days after the abduction. Marcus, realizing a living hostage was too great a liability, had called Finch on the burner phone and given the final cold command. With the recovery of the body, the case against Marcus and Finch solidifies from a complex circumstantial puzzle into a straightforward murder prosecution. The evidence is now overwhelming. They have Finch's detailed confession, the cell phone records, the financial trail of embezzlement, and now the victim himself. The legal proceedings begin, but the outcome is all but certain. Marcus Thorne, the polished CFO, and Arthur Finch, the disgraced polygraph examiner, are facing life sentences. The aftermath leaves Eleanor Sterling in a strange, complicated position. She is now the sole heir to the Sterling fortune, a widow whose inheritance was secured not by her own hand, but by the bumbling greed of her husband's business partner. She is, by law, innocent, but a cloud of public suspicion lingers. Was her unnerving calm a sign of profound shock, or something else? Did she know more than she let on? It's a question that will never be officially answered, a loose thread that adds to the unsettling nature of the case. This is a common phenomenon in high-profile cases, known as acquittal by law, conviction by public opinion. Even when legally exonerated, a person can be forever tainted by the initial suspicion. And then there's Julian, the resentful stepson. The investigation clears him completely. His anger was genuine, but it wasn't murderous. The odd burn marks on his shirt were exactly what he claimed, from welding. In a strange twist of fate, his stepfather's death has given him a kind of freedom. He's no longer under Rick's tyrannical shadow. He inherits a trust fund set up by his mother years ago, and he continues to create his haunting sculptures in the barn, a silent, brooding artist on the edge of an empire he never wanted. But the true hero of this story, the one who broke the case open, is Max. The German Shepherd's role becomes a local legend, a testament to the inexplicable bond between a man and his dog. This brings up a fascinating, though legally unresolved, question: the validity of animal testimony. While a dog can't take the stand, its behavior can and has been used to establish probable cause or guide an investigation. Experts still argue about how to interpret such events. Was Max's reaction a result of a specific scent memory of the cigar, or a more general canine instinct for reading threatening human body language? Was he sensing Finch's fear and guilt, or was he reacting to a scent that he associated with the trauma of his master's abduction? We will never know for sure. It's a moment of pure, unquantifiable instinct that triumphs over calculated human deception. The final ironic twist comes during the sentencing of Marcus Thorne. He remains defiant, showing no remorse. In his final statement to the court, he doesn't address the Sterling family or express regret for his actions. Instead, he turns to his own lawyer and, in a moment of supreme arrogance, critiques the prosecution's case, pointing out the single flaw in his own plan. "It was perfect," he mutters, loud enough for the court stenographer to record. "Everything was accounted for. Everything but the damn dog." The statement hangs in the silent courtroom, a perfect epitaph for a scheme so clever, yet so thoroughly defeated by the simplest, most loyal love. The man who lived by numbers and calculated risks was ultimately undone by a variable he couldn't possibly quantify. He had planned for every human weakness, greed, resentment, suspicion, but he never planned for canine loyalty. In the end, the truth was revealed not by a machine designed to detect lies, but by the unwavering instinct of an animal who knew the scent of a traitor. The dog, who was brought into the room to calm a liar, ended up exposing one instead. And so, the sun sets once more over the rolling hills of wine country, the neat rows of grapevines standing as silent witnesses to the turbulent human drama that unfolded among them. The case of Rick Sterling's disappearance is officially closed, its narrative a tangled vine of greed, betrayal, and the loyalty so profound it transcended the barrier between species. It serves as a stark reminder that the most elaborate plans, the most carefully constructed lies, can be unraveled by the smallest, most unexpected details. A misplaced cigar, a nervous tremor in the voice, the growl of a faithful dog. The truth, as it so often does, found a way to surface, even when buried in a shallow grave of deception. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight, for letting my voice fill the quiet corners of your space. These stories of darkness are a little easier to navigate together. If you found yourself captivated by the twists and turns of this case, a like on the video is always deeply appreciated. And leaving a comment with your thoughts truly helps build our community of late-night truth seekers. Sharing this story with someone you think might enjoy it helps more than you know. There are countless more cases lurking in the shadows, each with its own unique lessons and haunting questions. And I look forward to exploring them with you very soon. Until then, I hope the soft hum of your fan or the quiet of your room feels a little more peaceful now.